Tonight, we are going to be talking about the omnipresence of God. So I think we spent 4 or 5 weeks in our series of the one another's. I think we did 4 or 5 weeks, and I stepped out last week, and then I'm doing something different this week. We may or may not get back to that. We may, but we did 5 weeks in that series, so we may or may not get back to it. One thing I will say for our Facebook Live folks, at the end of the service, we tend to, we say goodbye to you, and then we have a little prayer time, share time in here, where we share any prayer requests or neat things that are going on in our life. And so if you've been with us on Wednesday, you know this. If you message me, if you Facebook message me, or on Messenger, or if you text me, 419-571-6671. And probably need to be doing it about now to make sure that I get it. Sometimes if you wait till we're done, then I don't get it. Sometimes it won't come to me until after we're finished. But 419-571-6671. Text me, Facebook message me, and give me your prayer request, and then I'll pass it on to the folks here. And we'll make sure we mention that, and they can update their prayer lists because of that. So tonight we are going to be talking about a characteristic of God that I think can be a comfort to us and a terror to us, depending on the position of our lives. It's called the omnipresence of God. Have you ever desired to be in two places at the same time? Oh man, like all the time, right? I like to say, okay, this Mike gets to sleep in until 11. And this Mike's going to get up at 6, and do those things. And there are sometimes we're just practically, not so much now that we have, two adult children who have their driver's license and are over the age of 18. But you think about when they were all active and none of them drove. How do two parents with no family in town get 3 kids to 3 different places at the same time? They don't. So they've got to make honorary grandmas and grandpas like Jane and Buford. Really got a lot of that work for a few years to help us move kids around. But so there's times where I'd be like, I'd love to be at 2 places at once. Maybe you've thought of the omnipresence of God and thought, man, if I was omnipresent, I could get all of my duties done at once and then have time to spend the rest of my day resting or something. But creating many of you and dividing and conquering is not consistent with the doctrine of the omnipresence of God. So the first thing that I think a lot of times people think about is they think of like God dividing himself into tons of little gods and dividing and conquering, kind of like you would like make 2 of you or 4 of you or 6 of you. That's not how the concept of the omnipresence of God works. Does that make sense? So these first 2 illustrations are just going to be kind of refuting some thoughts. When we think of the omnipresence of God, the first thing we think about is just kind of a ton of little gods. He reproduces himself and goes, some in China and some in Asia and some in America and here and there. And that's not the omnipresence of God. So if you were omnipresent and there wasn't a bunch of you, then you would probably think of yourself as being huge, by which you were so big that your body covered every space of the earth. Kind of like the big marshmallow giant ghost in Ghostbusters. Y'all remember that thing? Anybody remember that? Ghostbusters from the 80s? Okay. Y'all need to get a life. Just kidding. But in the 80s, there was the movie Ghostbusters. I think it was the original. It was a big marshmallow ghost, and he was huge. Kind of think Macy's Day Parade, kind of floating down, but huge. I think sometimes people think of the omnipresence of God like that, like the big marshmallow giant ghost that's bigger than anything around it, or Gulliver and Gulliver's Travels. But this is also inconsistent with the omnipresence of God, because in that illustration, some parts of the world would have his foot, and other parts would have his liver, and other parts would have his head. When you think of just being big, a big god, or a big marshmallow ghost, or a big Gulliver, and so none of the ways that lots of times we think of the omnipresence of God is actually consistent with how the omnipresence of God works. It's important to remember, what's important to remember is that God being everywhere fills every point of space with his entire being. Okay. Does that make sense? Let me say that again, because that's huge when you understand the omnipresence of God. So it's important to remember that God being everywhere, so God is omnipresent, he is everywhere. That in being everywhere, he fills every point of space with his entire being. Like one section doesn't get his love and one get his justice. And there's no indication that simply part of God is one place and another part of him is another place. When the saints worship in their churches, some saints don't have a part of him or an aspect of God, while other saints possess a different part or aspect. Rather, we all have God. The fullness of his presence is located everywhere. God is everywhere. God is not only everywhere with his power upholding and governing every creature in the universe, but he is everywhere with all of his being. And because his being is everywhere present, his divine attributes also are everywhere. God is not limited by time or by space. He is present everywhere at the same time with his whole being. So in the old superhero cartoons back in the 70s, on Saturday mornings, like I think it was 6 or 6:30, if I got up early enough, I could watch superheroes and Friends. I could watch Superman and Friends. And they had all these superheroes. And one superhero that I never, ever liked was Aquaman. Never liked Aquaman. Because to me, as a kid, Aquaman was too limited. You know, it's kind of like, hey, if you come in the water, I'll get you. You know? But if the bad guy doesn't come in the water, he can't get him. Because he's limited. His power's only good in the water. Well, here's the point I'm trying to make. God is not like Aquaman. He has no limits. He has no boundaries. There's no place that he cannot be. His presence would even fill hell. I mean, there's no place that God cannot be. Of course, I'd say his judging presence is there. So God is not limited by space or time. He is present everywhere at the same time with his whole being. There's nowhere in the entire universe that a person can go by which they can get away from God. And if the truth be told, there are times when this is not only an encouraging truth, but there are times where this is a disturbing truth. In our sinful rebellion, we want to escape God's presence. Who am I thinking about in the Bible? Old Testament prophet? Jonah. There's times where we probably don't really want him around when we engage in sinful activities. But God doesn't leave us or give us a minute to ourselves. Wherever we go, he is already there. But usually, and most of the time, this truth is actually, isn't it? It's comforting, right? One guy said it this way: because of God's omnipresence, we are never alone. He is there in our laughter and there in our tears. He is there when we pump our fists with excitement and when we hang our head in despair. He goes on to say, he stands by our side as we watch our loved ones breathe their last. He walks with us from the grave and through our grief. He never leaves us nor forsakes us. The omnipresence of God is Emmanuel, God with us through eternity. So this is another attribute of God that clearly makes a distinction between God and his creation. Remember, I've told you that there are the communicable and the incommunicable attributes of God. That's the theological word. I use the word shareable and unshareable to help it make sense. There are some characteristics of God that we can share. We can share. There are several characteristics of God that we can share. Now, we don't hold them perfectly like he does, but we can share in mercy. We can share in justice. We can share in love. Does that make sense? But there's some characteristics that we can't share in that make God God. like omnipotence. You cannot have complete and total power. A sovereignty. You are not self-sufficient in yourself. Omniscience. You don't know everything. And actually, omniscience means more than knowing everything. It means prescriptively knowing. I mean, I know an apple is red because it's red, but when God knows an apple is red, he makes an apple red. So even in his omniscience, his all-knowing, we're not like him. And this is another characteristic that we cannot share. We are finite. He is infinite. We are limited. He is unlimited. We are not omnipresent. I am here. I am nowhere else. I'm not at home cutting the grass. I'm not in my office working on Sunday sermon. I'm right here, every bit of me. And that's not much of me, right? But not so with God. So this is an incommunicable attribute of God. There are several verses we're going to kick around. I'm just going to give you a handful. And I got 4 points for tonight. So let me just give you a host of passages, starting with Deuteronomy chapter 4, verses 37 through 40. Of course, the one that you probably go to immediately. Like if I said one passage that talks about the omnipresence of God, I hope you probably say Psalm 139, 7 through 10. We're going to get there. Of course we're going to get there. How can you do a lesson on the omnipresence of God and not go there? But go to Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 37 through 40. These baby waters are great when I'm not thirsty, and they're not great when I am. It's funny, but they're so cute. And because he loved your fathers and chose their offspring, Deuteronomy 4:37, after them and brought you out of Egypt with his own presence by his great power, driving out before you nations greater and mightier than you to bring you in, to give you their land for an inheritance, as it is this day. Know therefore today and lay it to heart that the Lord is God in heaven above and on the earth beneath. There is no other. He is God who is in heaven, and at the same time he is in heaven, he is on earth, and he is in the earth beneath. Therefore, keeps going, you shall keep his statutes and his commandments, which I command you today, that it may go well with you and your children after you, and that you may prolong your days in the land of the Lord your God, and giving you all for all times. Proverbs 15:3, the eyes of the Lord are in every place, keeping watch on the evil and the good. I heard a deacon one time in a church that I did pulpit supply for, but he was teaching Sunday school. And he made a statement. You've probably heard me say it before. He said, you probably think that you've done some sins and God's not seen them. And you're right. But I was like, what? And then he said, but when you get to heaven, God has an eternal videotape of your life, and y'all are going to sit down and watch it together, and then he's going to say, see, ha, ha, right there, I caught you. And I thought, wow, where did you get your theology? There is no eternal videotape. He's not going to figure it out in heaven. He knows right now. Proverbs 15:3, the eyes of the Lord are in every place, keeping watch on the evil and the good. Colossians chapter 1, verses 15 through 17, speaking of Jesus. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created, in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. All things were created through him and for him, and he is before all things. And in him all things hold together. He is before all things. Matthew chapter 18, verse 20, truly I say to you, whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Again, I say to you, if the two of you agree on earth about anything they ask, it will be done for them by my heavenly Father. For where there are two or three gathered in my name, there I am among them. God is everywhere. So I got 4 points. The first point is a simple point. I've already actually my whole introduction really was this first point. So when I give you this first point, I've pretty much already give you the answer. Defining God's omnipresence. I feel like you probably already have a pretty good grasp on it from what I said. Omni is the Latin word for all present. Omni omnipresent. Omnipresent, therefore, means that God is all present. God is everywhere. Or to say it a different way, God is near to everywhere and everyone. If you ask where God is, where is God? He is here. He is there. He is everywhere. But usually when you ask that question, you're asking that question in relation to your own life. So He is where you are. Wayne Grudem said this in his systematic theology under the omnipresence of God. God does not have size or spatial dimensions and is present at every point of space with His whole being. Yet God acts differently in different places. Now I'm going to wait and hold off on that last line. We're going to hit that here in a minute. But that's just a little teaser. God acts differently in different places. All of Him is there, but not all of Him is acting in the same way. For instance, His presence fills hell, but His role there, what of His presence He acts upon is going to be different than what He's doing in heaven, if that makes sense at that same time. Second point. So that's the first point, defining, really, I've already defined it through my whole introduction. Second point, God is present at every point of space with His whole being. We've kind of already talked about this, but we're going to work on it some more. No one can hide from Him. No one. Jeremiah 23 and 24 says this, "Am I God at hand, declares the Lord, and not a God far away? Can a man hide himself in secret places so that I cannot see him?" Of course, the answer is no, declares the Lord. "Do I not fill heaven and earth?" declares the Lord. Here's his point. Some people are saying in this passage, God's far away. And He's like, you think I'm far away? And you think people can hide from me? Don't you realize I fill heaven and earth? You cannot hide from me. There is nowhere we can run to and escape God's reach. The God of all comfort, the God of all mercy, the God of all forgiveness, the God of all love surrounds you right now. And as a child of God, His Spirit, of course, dwells within you. Probably the passage that we know the best, Psalm 139, 7 through 10. Actually, 1 through 6 talks actually about His all-knowing, right? That He knew us from the womb. And not just knew of you, but knew you in a sense that He made you. He knew you into existence. Like I said, like when we know that an apple is red, I know it because it's a fact. When God knows an apple is red, He's making an apple red. The same way, God just doesn't just know you. He knows you in that He willed you into existence. He made you. So the all-knowing part of God is mentioned in verses 1 through 6, but the omnipresence part of God is mentioned the rest of the chapter. We're going to look at verses 7 through 10. Where shall I go from your spirit? Or where shall I flee from your presence? If I ascend to the heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you are there. If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the remotest, I think that's KJV, uttermost parts of the sea. Like places that are so low and the pressure so high that not even submarines or divers can get to. Even there, your hand shall lead me and your right hand shall uphold me. Nowhere we can go. God does not have size or spatial dimensions. In 1 Kings 8:27, will God, so this is Solomon. He's dedicating the temple. They've just opened up the holiest of places, pulled back the curtains, and he asks the question, but will God indeed dwell on the earth? Behold, heaven and the highest heaven cannot contain you. How much less this house that I have built? And of course, right when he says that, right, the Shekinah glory of God floats through the temple and lands in the holiest of holies. It's the coolest thing ever. But that's his point. Like, can God dwell on earth? Like, the whole world cannot contain you, let alone this house that I have built. It's the omnipresence of God is related to his limitlessness. It's related to his ubiquity. It's related to his infinity. Infinity means to be unbound, unlimited, unrestricted, and not having an end. So they're very related. God's eternity, which is also an aspect of his infinity. When infinity is applied to time, you have eternity, right? So God is eternal. That is, he is exalted above the limitations of time and the limitations of space. Yet I told you that God is everywhere, yet God acts differently in different places. Some places God is present to bless. Other places God is present to sustain. God is present to discipline, like Jonah. God is present to punish, like in hell. So all of God is everywhere, yet God acts differently in different places. Third, don't get caught in the confusion of omnipresence. There is some confusion with omnipresence. For instance, God is in all things, but God is not all things. You know, have you ever heard someone say, God is in everything. I am God. You are God. This tree is God. God is everywhere. God is in everything. So we're all gods. Wrong again. It's pantheism, panentheism. Those would be false doctrines using omnipresence. God, everything is not God. And because God is in everything, it doesn't mean that they are gods. God is in all things, but God is not all things. That's pantheism. This old error regarding the presence of God identifies the being of God with the substance of the creature. It denies the separate existence of God. God is God. They would say God is all things and all things are God. Wrong. That's pantheism. Another old error has God present in the universe but absent as to his being. This is what we call deism, right? You know, that an impersonal... Well, okay, so there was a set of movies that came out. The first one came out in 1977, 80, and 83, and then a new trilogy came out in the late 90s that kind of take this concept of this impersonal deity. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? Yes, Star Wars, the Force, an impersonal power that you can tap into. It's in the family of deism. They say that having created all things and having infused certain powers and laws in the universe, God absents himself from creation and observes from a distance the unfolding of history. There's a force. God is in this. God is kind of far off. Once again, this is inconsistent with the teaching of the omnipresence of God. God and all of his energy, all in his characteristic, all in his authority, all in his desires, is everywhere, in every place, all the time. Now, let me see if I'm going to hit this or not. I can't remember. I'm going to hit it, but I don't know if I wrote it down. There's a difference between the presence of God and the manifest presence of God. You know, there are times, and I know this is somewhere, I don't see it in my notes, and so I'm afraid if I don't say it, let me just take a look really fast. Yeah, let's just do it right here. There are times where God chooses to make his presence more known than others. In the times of great trial and loss, sometimes it's God's will to just distance himself a bit to make us long for. And if you want to challenge me on that, make it a CCQ question, but we're not doing that right now. But there are passages that communicate that. It doesn't mean that he's not there, but just that awareness of his presence. And a lot of times that's gone because of the sin in our own heart. Last thing, practical implications from God's omnipresence. Practical implications from God's omnipresence. The first one is God's omnipresence is a stern warning to the non-Christian and even the sinning Christian. Remember my illustration of littering? Someone's walking down the street. We all know littering's wrong. It's not cool. It's not good for the environment. You eat a bag of chips. You get to the last chips. You even go in the bag to get the chip dust because that's salty and tastes good. Eventually, you're done with the bag. Okay. If you're going to litter, what you typically do, you're already looking in front of you because you're walking. Look, take a glance to the side, a glance over your shoulder. You wad it up. You drop it by your side and let go. They looked in front of them, looked to the side of them, looked behind them. But what way did they not look? They did not look up. They didn't see anyone, so they threw it down. But there's always someone who sees you. God's omnipresence is a stern warning to the non-Christian and the sinning Christian. The truth that God is omnipresent is a truth that always produces fear, either a godly fear or a mortal fear, but fear nonetheless. It is very striking that several of the passages that speak of the omnipresence of God also speak of people trying to hide from God. Because man's conscience accuses him of sin, he is afraid of a holy God, therefore seeks to try to distance himself from God. For instance, when you are at your spiritually worst, do you crave to come to church? Probably not. Do you want to? When you have determined that you are going to live in rebellion, are you excited when Christian friends want to hang out with you and talk to you about it? No. You distance yourself from God in all things related to God. That's what people do. There's a fear. Everyone fears the omnipresence of God. There's a holy fear for those who stand in awe of a God who is always with them and sees everything. And for the unbeliever or the sinning Christian, it's a terror. It's a terror. This was true of Adam and Eve. Already immediately after, what did they do as soon as they fell? As soon as they ate of the fruit, what did they do? They hid themselves. This was also true of Jonah when he tried to run from God in the open ocean. God's disciplining presence found him. And even from the belly of the fish, God was present with him and heard him. So God's omnipresence is a stern warning to the non-Christian. B, God's omnipresence is a great assurance to his children. It's a great assurance and encouragement in our relationship with God. That God is always there. One of the things that harms relationships is distance, right? You can't warm up to someone and talk to someone and really relate to someone and know someone when you're not with them. You can there might be a fondness, but it's not concrete. It's not something that's of substance. It's not something that helps the relationship grow. And so, in our relationship with God, He is always present. In life's troubles, He is always present. In our prayer, He is always present. In our evangelism, He is always present. Think about in the Bible, He was with the Hebrew boys in the fiery furnace. He was with Daniel in the lion's den. He was with Moses. He was with Moses in the burning bush. He was with Joseph in the well and in Egypt. Like a huge point in the Bible to tell us that yet God was with him. Like that's huge in the story. Like those lines are like, that's a theme. He was in a well and everybody abandoned him, yet God was with him. And he was in Egypt, and he was a slave and being mistreated and being accused, yet God was with him. And even though the Lord is fully present everywhere, here it is. This does not, in my notes, I found it. This does not mean we always feel His presence equally. And that's sometimes where we have those dark nights of the soul. Have you ever had a moment where you just feel like you cannot connect with God? That He just feels like He's not there? I think if we're all honest, we all have those moments. It's like I'm praying to you, but I just don't think you're hearing me. I'm crying out to you, and I just don't think you see me. I need you desperately, and I just don't think you're here. He's always, always there, like always there. Yet, the truth is, we don't always feel his presence equally. At times it's because of our sin, and it's at times because he wants us to yearn for and thirst for and long for him. At times he causes us to sense and notice his manifest presence more strongly at certain times and in particular places. Like I said, like the fiery furnace, the lion's den, the burning bush. Yet there may be times that we may not feel his presence with us strongly. We know that he's always present with us nonetheless. See, the truth of God's omnipresence is a source of worship. It's a source of worship. It's a source of worship in that it helps us to understand the great difference between God and us. And thus we're filled with reverential awe and a spirit of worship that the world cannot contain the presence of God, that God is everywhere. As I already read to you, 1 Kings 8:27, right? That was a moment of worship for Solomon. But will God indeed dwell on the earth? I mean, the God, behold, the heaven and the highest heaven cannot contain him. Yet his presence is going to be visible for us in this. How much this house that I have built. So it was an act of worship for him. And lastly, D, the truth of God's omnipresence creates great confidence and trust in Christians. I don't care what you're going through. God is here. I don't care how great your doubt is, how awful your sin is. God is here with all of his power and all of his characteristics to forgive and help and punish and discipline and care for and love and listen to. Psalm 34, verses 15 through 22 says this: "The eyes of the Lord are toward the righteous, and his ears toward their cry. The face of the Lord is against those who do evil, to cut off the memory of them from the earth. When the righteous cry for help, the Lord hears and delivers them out of their troubles. The Lord is near to the brokenhearted and saves the crushed in spirit. Many are the afflictions of the righteous, but the Lord delivers them out of them all. He keeps all of his bones, not one of them is broken." Now, hopefully you realize what's going on here now, right? Now we got into some messianic prophecy. "Afflictions will slay the wicked, and those who hate the righteous will be condemned. The Lord redeems the life of his servants. None of those who take refuge in him will be condemned." You see what it said there? How this gives great confidence and trust. The face of the Lord is toward, the eyes of the Lord are toward the righteous. He hears their cries. His ears are toward their cries. When the righteous cry for help, the Lord hears and delivers them. He's right there. Psalm 145, 18 through 20. "The Lord is near to all who call on him, to all who call on him in truth. He fulfills the desire of those who fear him. He also hears their cry and saves them. The Lord preserves all who love him, but all the wicked he will destroy." And one last verse, Isaiah 57:15. The truth of the omnipresence creates a great confidence and trust for Christians. "For thus says the one who is high and lifted up, who inhabits eternity, whose name is holy, set apart. I dwell in the high and holy place, and also with him who is of a contrite and lowly spirit, to revive the spirit of the lowly and to revive the heart of the contrite." So when you wonder where God is, where was God? He was right there. He was right there doing his holy will. When you're in the car and there's no one in the passenger seat, just think about God being right there. When you're in a room and you're about to sin, when you're about to do something and you want to look both ways, realize God is there. When you just feel abandoned and there may not be a single soul on earth who cares for you in that moment, God is right there with all of his characteristics caring for you. Father, may you bless this study, I pray. In Jesus' name.